Right. Oh, crikey, that's very good, that one. Right, welcome everybody to the committee meeting of the North Essex Parking Partnership here at Braintree today. Thank you very much for your hospitality, Braintree, and I'm told to let you know that there's no planned fire drills or anything like that, so if we do hear an alarm we can make our way out to the back right hand corner of the room where there's a fire exit and convene in the car park. Everybody, welcome, thank you for coming. Councillors, officers, guests, thank you very much for coming. We move on to the agenda a couple of minutes late. I do apologise for that. Welcome and introductions. I think we've just covered that. Apologies and substitutions, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. We've got apologies from Councillor Stacey Seals from Harlow.
Thank you. And we also have guests joining us online as well, so welcome to them. We move on then to item number 3, which is declarations of interest. Can I ask if there are any, please? I don't see anyone raising an arm or shouting in this direction, so I'll take that as a no declarations of interest. Thank you very much. We move on to item number 4, one of our regular items, have your say. Mr. Risdon, welcome. You have your time to speak, sir.
This concerns the Purley TRO application. Chairman and committee members, on this occasion I make no apology for asking your indulgence. I and colleagues have been seriously wronged throughout the process. The original TRO application, supported by 79% of residents, was made solely for Purley Way. The committee decided to widen the survey to include Howard Hill. The application was approved on the 1st of October 2020, but over 3 months later, NEPP staff, without reference to the committee, decided to withdraw single-line 1-hour restrictions. This was later reversed, but damage to this application had been done. The Buchanan report of March 2022 contains almost all the arguments of Purley Way residents in favour of having the restrictions. These arguments were swamped by the volume of statistics on a 43-page report which stated there was no case for such restrictions. This was seized upon by the NEPP staff and without reference to the JPC was issued to residents as a fait accompli. Detractors of restrictions keep stating there is no parking problem in Purley Way. Let me assure the committee there is a problem, particularly at and near the Howard Hill junction and over the entire upper section of the road. Some commuter vehicles are still parked there and others will be as home working reduces. The residents who park in the road are the loudest objectors. I challenge the committee decision of the 19th of December because A, the informal survey that followed the calling in involved a doorstep conversation. This method leaves plenty of room for error. I cannot believe that 16 households are against the restrictions. My estimate is far short of that, and only 2 additional supporters would achieve the 70% required by the committee. B, as lead petitioner to the TRO application, why was I not specifically informed of the JPC meeting to be held on the 19th of December? This was scandalous, effectively preventing me from attending and from advising the other petitioners of the situation. Of the 13 objections minuted on the 19th of December, 5 of these were from Howard Hill. Of the other 8, 2 were submitted separately by a husband and wife in Purley Way, therefore reducing the publicly objecting households in that road to only 7. Every other road in the vicinity except Howard Hill is under single-line 1-hour parking restriction. I appeal to the committee, 1, to declare the result of the informal survey unreliable and therefore invalid. 2, to support a new short written survey for Purley Way in terms to be agreed with between the lead petitioner and the group manager of NEPP for issue during October 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Risdon. As noted and mentioned before, I admire your passion and perseverance on this subject, so your comments are noted and we will have a discussion about that, I'm sure. Thank you very much. The next speaker I have down is Richard Kempley, please. Thank you. Richard, you've got 3 minutes and a little bit more if you need it.
Yes, I should just let you know, as your first-time speaker here, I'll ring the bell after 2 minutes, so you know that you've got 1 minute remaining.
Okay, this concerns parking in the Summit Loughton. Parking by non-residents in the Summit Loughton is a problem. It involves road safety and access issues for residents and other road users. Parking by non-residents obscures motorists' vision of bends and junctions. In December last year, a petition from Summit residents for parking restrictions gained over 92% in favour. The petition was delivered to the NEPP.
Mr. Kempley, sorry, can I just stop you there? Because your valid and well-presented speech so far is being just detracted from that beeping noise. Can we just try and work out what that might be before we...
My watch.
Great,
Sorry.
so you've earned yourself another 30 seconds there, so I'll let you get cracked straight back in.
If I set it off, will I get any more time? No. Okay. In December last year, a petition from Summit residents for parking restrictions gained over 92% in favour. The petition was delivered to the NEPP by Councillor Sam Kane. The petition was not successful. The reasons given for not proceeding to consultation are baffling. They are, number one, since the end of the pandemic, there has been a noticeable difference in the level of parking in the area. Yes, there is a difference. It has increased. Number two, properties in the Summit have off-road parking and the scheme would not be self-financing. I hope finance would not be a concern when considering safety of motorists and pedestrians. How can a level of finance involved be judged if residents have not been asked for their views? Without off-road parking, the problem would be even worse. If parking permits is not an answer, why is an alternative parking restriction not considered? Number three, the parking issues linked to the nearby school are only present for a portion of the day. That portion of the day is 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's the bulk of the day. The facts that we submitted have not been addressed. The problem existed before restrictions were considered and dismissed in nearby Baldwin's Hill. The problem still exists. The main cause of the parking problem is because of Woodcroft School staff. The school in Whitaker's Way employs 70 staff. It has grown way beyond its original remit in 1963. It is sited in a private road and does not have a car park. The Summit is now, in effect, a car park for the school. The Woodcroft School handbook tells staff that the school is situated in a heavily residential area and as a result parking is very restricted. However, staff are told to park in neighbouring roads. School staff cars are regularly parked on bends and pavements. This hinders free flow of vehicles and visibility. Often untaxed school staff cars are clamped by the DVLA. The clamped cars are then left overnight outside residents' homes. There is a culture of parking where you like with no regard for residents or others who use the road. Our petition has a very high level of support. We would not be here today if this was not a problem. Finally, I must mention that we found out that the Have Your Say link on the NEPP website is not working. This removes an opportunity for views to be expressed. I was told by Samantha Neville of the NEPP that this was because they had recently changed their website, and it still isn't working as of 11 o'clock this morning. Please review this decision and look again at the evidence we submitted to you today, the evidence we submitted to Mr. Kane, and we have copies of that here today if anyone wishes to see them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kempley. Thank you. We have Mrs. Sue Griffiths, please, on the same subject matter. Welcome, Sue. 2 minutes, then you get a bell, and then you get another minute. It's like a game of cat and mouse, isn't it?
In December 2022, the Summit in Loughton petitioned the NEPP for parking measures. A previous petition had failed. We believe that there has been a lack of due process and transparency. Our main issue is the all-day parking by employees of a local business. Walkers and dog walkers also park to avoid parking fees in forest car parks. If a car parks in one particular spot in the street, 6 houses are unable to leave their homes safely. The business employees also have a car cleaning company visit the summit to clean their cars on a weekly basis. The van parks on a corner outside of number 14 with various water and electric cables draped across the road. There has also been access issues for emergency and trade vehicles. 13 houses in the street have residents aged over 70, many needing care. My next door neighbour has carers 4 times daily. The petition was signed by 25 of the 27 houses in the summit. 1 abstained and 1 house is vacant. It was passed to the NEPP on our behalf by Councillor Sam Kane. Councillor Kane received a response. The NEPP are telling us to park on our drives so that we will not need parking measures. Yet they have implemented parking measures in Loughton on streets where all houses are priced over £2 million. All have parking for 4 or 5 cars. Why, I ask? Earlier last year, we were a late addition to an application for parking measures by residents of Baldwin's Hill, Loughton. Sometime later, I asked the NEP for an update, and I was informed by an officer at the NEPP that the scheme had been agreed and lines, signs, etc. would be in place in July. By the beginning of September, as nothing had materialised, I contacted the officer and asked for an update. He explained that there had been a consultation that had received objections and a threat that if these parking restrictions were implemented, the objectors would take the case to the High Court. Senior members of the NEPP were so concerned that this was a serious threat, they chose not to implement the scheme. I asked about the public consultation, as the residents of the summit had no knowledge of this. I was informed that notices were posted and that the NEPP had personally hand-delivered a letter to all properties included in the parking restrictions application. This is totally untrue. I can confirm that not one property in the summit received this letter.
Is that everything?
Sorry.
You done?
Yes.
Oh, lovely. Thank
Sorry.
you very much. That's all right. Good day, everyone. Thank you. Much appreciated, Sue. We have a couple of written statements now, also pertaining to the summit in Loughton, which will be read out. The first one is from Nigel Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies for my failing voice. Mr. Conway writes, recent changes in parking close to the summit Loughton have seen an excessive number of vehicles now parking in this road, which is a cul-de-sac. The road has become a car park for a local school, with vehicles parked with no regard to road safety. Emergency vehicles cannot access parts of the summit, which is a real concern. Car cleaning also takes place regularly in the road Monday to Friday, although these cars are not allocated to residents. We have previously contacted NEPP concerning a parking permit scheme or a form of parking restriction being implemented. As part of this consultation, it was stated that letters were sent to all residents about an application. However, these were not received by any resident. Therefore, we are requesting proof that this is implemented. We see this as an abuse of process. In summary, we are formally requesting a full and legal consultation process to be confirmed in writing. Statement ends.
Thank you, Owen. The further statement we have is, once again, as said, in relation to the summit in Loughton, and it's from Ivan Brown to be read out.
Mr. Brown writes, I'm writing to you in connection with the parking situation at the summit in Loughton. Looking back to the summer of 2022, we discovered that parking restrictions were proposed to be introduced on Baldwin's Hill, road that the summit is accessed via. to manage parking around some of the housing without off-street parking. In the summit, we are located in walking distance of a special needs school, Woodcroft School, where significant numbers of staff park on both Baldwin's Hill and the summit, along with forest walkers trying to avoid the recently introduced pay and display parking in the forest car parks and visitors to the local pub, the Foresters. As you can imagine, parking becomes an issue during term time and often leads to extreme congestion on the summit and sometimes dangerous parking on corners, obscuring vision at junctions, parking on both sides of the road. I'm particularly concerned about the cul-de-sac for numbers 8, 10 and 12, where the road is narrow and can become hard to access for lorries, emergency vehicles and refuse collection. The level of parking in the cul-de-sac can present a significant access risk on a day-to-day basis and in an emergency. I believe you have been supplied with example photographs. Since restrictions have been introduced on Baldwin's Hill, the parking sprawl has increased and the situation has become even more difficult on a day-to-day basis. I'm particularly concerned that, as residents of the summit, we have not been consulted as part of the parking restrictions process, and although it has been claimed we were written to, I do not know of anyone in the street who ever received a letter of consultation. In addition, we did not receive written confirmation of the decision to introduce parking restrictions on Baldwin's Hill or the rationale behind it, and had our own application for parking restrictions on the summit declined without explanation. There seems to be a lack of process followed here and a lack of transparency in decision making from the summit residents' point of view. The situation is getting worse, and I would urge you to start a new consultation process, engaging residents of the summit to agree the best way to manage the parking situation in the summit. I have tried to add this comment to the Have Your Say link, but it was not working on a number of occasions in the last few days. I look forward to your response. Statement ends.
Thank you, Owen, and thank you to everyone that has come forward under the Have Your Say items this afternoon, especially those that have taken the time to travel here today to Braintree to express your comments very eloquently, I might add. I do believe we have some form of response on this Loughton Summit article.
I'll just do a quick introduction and I shall hand over to my colleague Mr Butcher here. There's a lot of talk about consultation in this process. Let's go back a stage. The process for putting in parking restrictions is really tightly regulated. It's got its own set of regulations that tell us how to make regulations, and the consultation part of that comes after a decision that's been made at the Joint Committee. So it might appear that decisions get made at Joint Committee that say, yes, we'll go ahead and put this in, but the process still requires to go through that regulated consultation exercise. And when things go out to consultation, this is a legal process, if there are any objections to that, not numbers of objections, and it's not about support, it's about objections to the scheme, any of those that have any substance are valid objections, and they either have to be dealt with, or the scheme changed, or the scheme abandoned, or the scheme re-advertised. Now, if you go back to the time when we were looking at the scheme to start with, we were looking at the whole area, and I think the original application was for the Baldwin's Hill area, and we looked at that and said, if you put some restrictions here, what will happen to all those cars that were parking there? Where will they go? And if there's some deferred parking from that, you might need to look at a wider scheme to restrict a larger area. And at the time, there were a lot of objections to the Baldwin's Hill scheme, and therefore the whole thing fell at that point. So that's the position I think we're at. I'll hand over to you for a bit more detail, if that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, this is just a kind of prepared statement because there's quite a lot of detail in this. So apologies for me reading this off my laptop. But so at the October 2021 NEPP Joint Committee, the proposal number T22742969 for Baldwin's Hill in Loughton was approved. This was a proposal for resident permit holder parking and waiting restrictions to allow permit holders priority parking whilst also ensuring traffic flow. The summit is a road off Baldwin's Hill, and it became clear that if the proposal for a large-scale resident scheme was introduced on Baldwin's Hill, there would be displacement into nearby unrestricted roads, as Richard's mentioned. In addition, a supporting petition to request restrictions was also received from residents of the summit. In view of this, a proposal for resident permit holders only on the summit was also advertised at the same time. This was authorised by the NEPP Chair authority, and at the time the NEPP Chair was Councillor Lissamore. It is normal practice for NEPP officers to letter drop all properties within the catchment area of potential permit parking schemes when proposals are advertised. These letter drops include details of the proposal and information about resident parking permits. The proposal for permit parking on the summit was advertised on the 24th of March 22. As Richard mentioned, there is a legal framework that must be followed when parking and waiting restrictions are advertised. Part of this involves consideration of any objections or other comments that are received against the proposal. 72 objections were received against the proposal for permit parking on Baldwin's Hill, including a large percentage from the nearby school concerned about how restrictions would affect its operation. In view of the arguments that were put forward in the objections, it was decided that a much lesser permit parking scheme would be introduced to allow permit parking for the few properties on Baldwin's Hill that do not have associated off-street parking. The proposal for permit parking on the summit did not go ahead, as the main reason for the proposal was no longer relevant, i.e. the large permit scheme that's proposed on Baldwin's Hill was not being introduced, and the large parts of Baldwin's Hill which do remain unrestricted. Nonetheless, during the advertising process, NEPP did receive 11 objections to the proposal for permit parking on the summit, and I do have some comments, but I won't read through those here, but we would be able to share them if anyone was interested. If NEPP does receive a new application for permit parking or other restrictions on the summit, this will be scored and reported on by officers for consideration by the District Council and, if appropriate, then the NEPP Joint Committee. Nonetheless, it appears to officers that a majority, if not all, of the households in the cul-de-sac possess adequate off-street parking. If advertised, a proposal is likely to attract school-based objections, as well as objections from those living in Baldwin's Hill who rejected last year's larger proposal. Any permit parking scheme is unlikely to be self-financing, and much of the parking that occurs in the area is generated by a nearby school. That ends the statement.
Thank you very much. Right, we'll move on. Okay, we're moving on within the minutes, the agenda to the item 5, which is the minutes, please. You've had the opportunity to look through those following our meeting in December. Can I ask that there is a proposer, please, for those minutes?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to draw members' attention to the fact that following some input on the minutes, a non-substantive amendment was requested on that, just to clarify comments that Councillor Kane made at that meeting about Purley Way. So it's no change has been made to the decision or to the nature of it. But when Councillor Kane was outlining potential options, I've added an extra paragraph in there to clarify which he went for, and I've talked that through with Councillor Kane prior to this meeting.
You happy with that, Councillor Kane? All right, thank you. Thanks, Owen. Sorry about that. Can we have a proposer then, please? Yeah, Councillor Kane, thank you. Gets us off the mark. Seconder, please. Thank you, Richard. All those in favour, please. Raise a hand. Thank you. That's unanimous, I think, from all the councillors in the room. Thank you. We move on to item number 6, which is urgent items. Are there any? Hello there. Councillor Porter.
Can I ask for an urgent item to be put in regarding the current position, the current financial position? We've had some discussions in tendering with Colchester since the last meeting, and we've asked that this be a standing item, that we have financial position. We're going to make it a standing item for our cabinet as well, where we're going to request all of the information from the NEPP about its financial position and then take it to cabinet on a monthly basis. But today I wondered if we could add that in, minute the fact that I'm asking for it as well, and then actually have a financial position, because obviously, as we know, we're looking at around £680,000 guaranteed deficit this year, but potentially actually our figures show that could be closer to £1 million, which is a considerable amount of money for each partner. And if we could just have some more information on that today, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Porter, pertaining to our sort of off-street conversation we had at lunch, we will be provided with an update, certainly what we can tell you here today from Richard when we reach that agenda item in relation to charges. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I mean, if we could, obviously we've got the pricing, the change in pricing, which I think is agenda, whatever it is, item 7, yeah, which isn't quite the financial position. I was hoping to get a position on the actual deficit today that we could minute in this meeting, so that we know exactly what it is as we stand at this moment. Because we've requested a tendering. We've got P10 and P11, which show 680,000, isn't it, deficit? But we predict it's going to be much more than that because of the fact that PCNs, we can't see how they're going to amount to, well, 600 and something thousand in the next month. So unless that's going to happen, we'd just like to get a position so that it's minuted in this meeting what the deficit is of this moment.
It's certainly my intention with my proposal to delve into that under the agenda item number 7, but so if you're happy to not have it as a new agenda item, then I will ensure that that is covered within item number 7.
Can I get what I've said minuted, though?
Yeah, I'm eagerly seeing Owen scribble away there, so I'm sure that can be done and is being done as we speak. No problem. Is there any other items of urgent business that anyone would like to bring forward to today's meeting other than what's been explained? No? Right, thank you very much. So we do then move on to item number 7, which will bring into play what you've just been asking about, Councillor Porter. Is that all right? Thank you.
So hopefully members have had a chance to look through the permit fees and charges report. I'd included on that quite a lot of the background to how we got to the situation we're in now with permit pricing. There's some tables within the report that show some recommendations. I'll come back to those at the moment, in a moment, but just to cover off what Councillor Porter is saying there, yes, we normally have a financial statement review at each of the joint committees, and I think it's a pertinent thing to have going forwards, indeed, in the situation we find ourselves. But my attention has been solely focused on the very large financial hole that we seem to have found ourselves in as the result of a combination of factors. Firstly, we're not immune to the cost of living crisis that everybody's felt, in that most supplies and services that we procure have become much more expensive. We've also had a number of pay increases for the frontline staff. I can go all the way through the organisation, it has to be said, but to the lower grades in the organisation. There's a combination of factors there. We were, as you probably remember, suffering difficulty in recruiting staff, and as a result of that we decided to implement an uplift in the starting salary, and that did start to change the recruitment pattern that we were seeing. Following that, there was a pay rise of around 4.5% to those same staff, so that increased further the distance from which we budgeted. And then very late in the year, as I explained at the last meeting, we had another pay increase, which was to harmonise with the National Joint Committee's pay scale, an addition of 1,925 to those frontline staff. And again, that doesn't extend all the way through the organisation, I have to say, just the frontline staff. And a combination of all of those factors meant that, and that being backdated back to April, very late in the financial year, meant that it was too late to get back from that position. Now, normally, if we don't have quite so many staff employed, we'll have a vacancy factor. And that vacancy factor shows itself up in the employees' budget. So if we have fewer staff employed, we issue fewer PCNs, get less income from PCNs. But there's normally a commensurate gap in the budget where we haven't paid people because they haven't been employed. The net result of the 3 increases there, pay rise and 2 pay increases, was that it wiped out all of that vacancy factor saving, and in fact it's gone beyond what we have in the budget as well. So I'd normally have expected quite a large sum to come back from savings there, but that's just not going to happen this year. That, combined with some of the other costs, and indeed starting up one or two new areas of the business, has meant that we find ourselves in something of a hole. For those eventualities, we keep a reserve, and the reserve should be topped up to 400,000. At the moment, the reserve stands at 336.9 thousand, so 337k if you like. Once you've used that, of course, it's gone, and that could cause us a problem in the future as well. So if you take our current forecast deficit of 600 and whatever it's going to turn out to be, around 680,000, with a few more weeks of the financial year yet to go to find out what it actually is, take away the 337, it leaves us a gap of just under 350,000 in the current financial year, and that would use up all our reserves as well. And that's the deficit, 350,000, 349 and something, that we would take forward into the new financial year. Then within the new agreement, there's a pair of appendices which don't quite agree with each other. One's much older than the other. But the first of the two says that during the next financial year, if there's a deficit, those districts where there is a deficit would have to form a plan and put that to the next joint committee for approval, and then have some time for that plan to take effect. So that takes us through the year 23-24, the forthcoming financial year. Then there's Appendix F, which says if there's still a deficit, at that point it would be decided on the basis of equal contributions from all of the partner authorities. So it's at the point in 24-25 we'd find ourselves asking to cover the deficit that we found in 22-23, which currently would form around just under £50,000 per authority. Now, the focus of my work to date, from the time that we discovered this problem in around late December, and realised that in P10 January, for looking back at the December P9, P10, P11 forecasts, was to look at fees and charges. At the last meeting, you'll remember that I put to members if they would like to have a look at fees and charges. And at that point, there was a yes, please put together a report. So in comprising the report, I had a look at the Bank of England's financial, the factor they use for inflation. I used 2017 permit prices and applied the Bank of England's inflation rate calculator to see what prices should be. Now, if you had a look at the appendix to the report, you'll see that prices haven't changed for a number of years now. And the Bank of England's inflation calculator led me to consider what I should be recommending as the prices for permits from now on. I've also had a look at the two rates of inflation, the CPI figure, which is the Consumer Price Index, which is the annual figure. There's a CPIH as well, but that's monthly as opposed to annual. So I've had a look at the annual figure for the last year, and the RPI figure, which is the Retail Price Index. And those two are two different baskets of goods, for those of you who haven't looked. One is running at around about 10.1% at the time of writing the report. I think it topped out about 10.4%. And the other is in the mid-13%. So inflation has been galloping away, but I understand from the Chancellor's budget yesterday he's going to get that under control again by the end of the year. But by that time, of course, the damage has been done because inflation has happened and prices have increased. So the sum of all of that is that I've made some recommendations in the report, and you can have a look through there to see what they are. There's two tables, which, if I password right to log in, I can read them out to you. There's two tables. The first table talks about a price increase in the year to be introduced from June, and that would give us a part-year income. And then for future years, as we discussed at the last meeting, one of the members suggested that there should be a move to try and harmonise the pricing again. So I put forward some proposals for harmonising the prices in the following 3 years, by which time, of course, we'd realise a full year's income from the previous price increase, and those harmonisations would take effect. And there's an illustration on there in Table 1 of what that would mean. So in the first year, if we looked at the CPI inflationary rate that I've recommended, if we took all of the recommendations and implemented them, in the first year we'd realise 276,000, and then in the full year, all years thereafter, we'd realise 367,000, and then add on that to that's including the 90,000 for the prices we already put up in the year. That would increase to 356,000 for the full year next year. Cumulatively, that's 815,000 by the end of 23-24. We have to go a full year for these to be realised because people are renewing within the year. And then if we forecast forwards, we'd realise about £1 million. And then, of course, as we're looking off into the future, the forecast gets a little bit less exact, so about 1.3 million the year after that. So armed with all the calculations that we've had around the financial hole that we've got, this put together is something of a rescue plan to plug that hole, and would save us having to approach each of the districts at the end of 24-25 for that the amount of money that Councillor Porter mentioned earlier on. Each of these represents, I think it's around about it's about £5 to £7 per year increase in the first permit price, and a sliding scale thereafter. Some increases for some of the other things that we make a charge for, and also a couple of new charges there to cover things like the transactional charging and the convenience fee at curbside parking, and making an administrative charge for some of the other things that cost us. So there's a very broad overview of the recommendations in the paper, and I recommend that we choose the CPI option in the new financial year and have that implemented from June, and then choose the option to harmonise the prices of permits thereafter, which should bring us the amount in to not require Appendix E or Appendix F to be implemented, or invoked rather, in the agreement.
Thank you, Richard. I'm sure there'll be some comments or questions as a result of that. So I would open that up now. So I've got Councillor Kane indicating to speak first. Please.
Thanks, Chairman. A couple of questions. In the forecast that you've done for the subsequent years, has there been any estimation of the number of new schemes that might be introduced intra-year?
Not at the moment. The application of new schemes following would be one of the subject areas that we'd have to look at should we not take the decision to implement the increases today. I couldn't guarantee to be able to implement many new schemes at all. In fact, even in the new financial year, if we were to get a rein back on the finances without taking this other action. So one of the outcomes of taking a decision to increase these today would mean that we'd have sufficient budget to implement other TRO schemes. So a bit of a catch-22 situation there, I'm afraid, that one would probably lead from the other. As we go forward, I mentioned that the forecasting gets slightly less accurate as we move out from where we are now. Of course, it's very true that we'd have more income, but those schemes also have a cost to them as well. And we've discussed here, there's a step change that would be required in the amount of resources that we'd need at some point. We need to recruit more officers to give a fair coverage of each of the zones. So the thing has cost as well. But yes, I couldn't guarantee. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the other one I wanted to ask about, you mentioned during your introduction that intra-year you'd go back to those districts that weren't performing to look at remedial actions that could be taken within those districts. What kind of remedial actions might those districts be looking at?
The agreement is silent on those actions. It merely talks about putting a plan together. Now, I think you remember back to near the start of the previous joint committee where we said, do we want to be doing this by district or are we all in it together? And I think the overarching agreement was that we'd be all in it together. And that's the way we've approached the partnership from the start, and is still the way we approach the partnership now, at least I'd hope. So if the decision is taken on the report that we're considering at the moment, we wouldn't need to go down that avenue at all. This is the all-in-it-together approach that we're taking here. If that's not successful, and if we don't take that decision today, then we do need to start looking at what the legal agreement says, and we'd have to formulate a plan with each of the districts.
Thank you. Final one from me, if I may, Chair. So are you quite confident then that the forecast that you put together here will plug the hole this year and in subsequent years as things stand?
In terms of the way the agreement's written, and I understand it, need to take some more legal advice on that. Yes, the way the deficits are carried and the way the legislation is worded, we have up to 4 years in the legislation, so there's plenty of time in the legislation to pay back from future incomes back into the scheme. And the way that the agreement appears to me to be written, there's a bit of a caveat in that, you understand, is that we'd have a further 2 financial years to sort out the problem, by which time, of course, this and any future decisions that we care to make, should things be going wildly better, of course, we can go back in the other direction. There we are. That's the point at which we find ourselves.
Councillor Kane, are you comfortable with those answers? Councillor Walker. Sorry, Richard. Yes, sorry.
I'm Councillor Freeman. Thank you. Well, I can be Councillor Walker if you wish. Whatever. Thank you, Chairman. It's always a challenge when there's a hole in the budget, and I will be asked back home, what metrics do you have on the efficiency and the performance of North Essex Parking Partnership? And so I ask you that question. Now, what I mean is, I have no doubts myself that you're efficient. I have no desire to reduce your size or operation or whatever, but one has to be able to defend oneself with this, you see. So if we don't have metrics which are independent metrics, I think we need to get some, basically ongoing. It's just good practice, it's good governance to do that. It costs a bit of money because it has to be done from outside, but it's worth having. So if we haven't got that, I recommend putting it in place. On a different subject, the thing that sticks in my craw, as it were, with regards to residence parking, I live in one of the medieval towns in Essex, and on-street parking is very challenging. We do allow 2 cars per household or 3 cars per household, and in my town there are both examples. And the 2 car is 30% more than a single car, and the 3 car, if it's allowed, is 50% more. And I say, is it allowed? Certainly the ones in my town nobody's ever asked me about, and I'm the representative of NEPP. So there seems to be no democratic input to that, at least none that I've noticed, and there needs to be, otherwise there's no point in us being here. But for me, I would significantly increase, it won't make much difference to our overall budget, I know that, but I think it's fairer to charge substantially more for 2 cars than 1. You know, the sense of the room, the way we are now, is that fewer cars rather than more cars is what we're looking at. Greater use of public transport is what we're looking at. I know it's unpopular with many people, but that's just the way of it. And 3 cars is just obscene, in my view, in a heavily crowded street. And the fact you can pay for it is not a reason. You know, this is a very wealthy area. Uttlesford is an extraordinarily wealthy area. There are people with significantly expensive motors. 2 or 3 times the cost of a permit won't make a big difference, but it will make some. So I would suggest that you could do that. And the third thing is, very briefly, is that if we're going to increase at this stage and agree to it, I think we would go for the one that yields most. In other words, that would be the RPI, I think, rather than the CPI, because basically you want to plug the hole and plug it properly and do it quickly. We don't want to be coming back here and having to reconsider this again in a year's time or 18 months' time. Let's see if we can plug it now, please. Thank you.
Yes, on benchmarking, first of all, yes, we do. We benchmark nationally and also specifically we've benchmarked against Norfolk and Gloucestershire. And it's interesting, we've chosen those 2 as Norfolk has a contracted out service and, Gloucestershire has a contracted out service and Norfolk has an in-house service. We compare very well indeed with Gloucestershire. Our income per PCN, and still is, has always been around about £34 per PCN. So regardless of the outcome, that's a global measure of our success in getting income from PCNs. It's still hovering around £34 as we checked recently. Norfolk's wasn't that. Norfolk is a big rural county as well, which is why we benchmarked against them. And Norfolk had approached us for some information around the parking partnership and how we're set up to help guide them. And we were doing at the time, we benchmarked with them significantly better. And I do, through the national network, keep a close eye on how other parking services are performing. It's my job, isn't it, to do that? So I would. And nationally, there seems to be an average of around 1 PCN per hour issued, and our average is around 1 PCN per hour issued per CEO. So I think we benchmark comparatively with the others in the nation. Moving on to permits per household, there's a couple of different things in this, and there's a bit more that we'd like to have a look at within the operation of things, since particularly we've moved over to digital permits. As digital permits allow people to change the registration mark without necessarily having to come to us for a new piece of paper and a different piece of paper to stick in the windscreen with new registration on. So one of the things we want to make sure is that people aren't swapping the registration marks around a lot to take advantage perhaps of maybe changing it during the daytime to have a second vehicle out there and changing it back when that car's gone home from work and you come home from work to reserve your space, if you will. I'm not sure whether that happens or not, but it's a loophole that we've found in there, hence the recommendation for the admin fee after a reasonable number of changes in the year to dissuade people from doing that. I'll have some officers look at that in a bit more detail. We need to find out a bit more about what's going on there. But essentially, yes, you can buy 1 permit or 2 permits. The third permit is discretionary. So if somebody came with an application to us, I would come to you for the Attlesford area, Councillor. And of course in Colchester, where Councillor Hunt, I think it was, bless him, he's no longer with us, decided that he wouldn't have a third permit in Colchester because in some places in Colchester there's some very narrow house frontages and the vehicle is longer than the house, let alone having the restrictions on junctions for refuse vehicles and things to get through. So in Colchester, the decision was taken not to have a third permit at all, even by discretion. So you might want to take that decision at some point and never to apply your discretion to issue it. And yes, on the RPI, yes, I don't disagree either way. I think that's the decision for the committee to take.
My point was, Chairman, very briefly, was that we should increase the charges for the second and third vehicle, not just leaving it at a mere 30% or 50%. That makes no sense in my view.
Richard, please.
Thank you, Chairman. A very simple question. A major part of the income of NEPP is PCNs. Can you give us an indication of what the trend is in the amount of income from these over the last year since COVID has ceased to be such an issue?
Thank you. Yes, and extremely valid point. We noticed during COVID, well, we were issuing fewer of them, but they were being paid at a higher rate. They were up to about £38 per PCN during COVID. And you remember that during COVID, we retrenched back to just the hierarchy, the top level contraventions at that time. And for some time, we didn't do any work at all due to the various lockdowns and the other things that we were being told by government to do and not to do. So during the pandemic, we issued a fair degree fewer PCNs, but they were paid at a higher per PCN value. Since then, things have come back, and we've been able to recruit a little bit more successfully now. The dip in the issue number, as opposed to the rate, is because we didn't have so many CEOs working. We've been a bit more successful just lately in recruiting, and our recruitment drive's ongoing, I think, at the moment.
Do you want me to?
Yes, briefly. Yes, I'll come back to that.
Yeah, so the number of CEOs still isn't at capacity. Some of the changes that Richard alluded to earlier around pay increases has helped, particularly in the eastern areas, so it's Tendring, Colchester and Braintree. but we're still finding it very, very difficult to recruit in the western areas, so particularly Harlow and Epping Forest. That's definitely our main area of concern. What we've done to help focus on that is take the business development officers and redeploy them to focus on recruitment, because it's such a crucial area, as you said. PCN income is our main revenue stream, and there is a relationship between the number of CEOs that we have and the number of PCNs that we issue, and then the level of income that we get. So it is a priority for us to try and fill those vacancies. But what we've done very, very recently, we're reviewing the feedback now, actually, is we're going across to all staff, actually, to try and come up with some innovative ideas about how to get more people through the door, retain them for longer. We're working through that now. But a lot of efforts across the partnership are going in to resolve the recruitment as it stands, because it's a priority for us.
Yeah, thank you for that background. Very useful, and I think we all understand the importance of having the CEOs. But in broad terms, if our income last year was I forget the figure, £1 million from PCNs, what is it likely to be next year and the year following, assuming that you do have more staff? Just a broad brush, please.
Yes, in terms of the budget that was proposed, yet to be decided upon, we'd set a £2.2 million PCN budget, income budget. Pre-pandemic, we were in that ballpark region. We've always had vacancies, as again Richard alluded to, which has always then offset that gap that we have between what we actually achieve versus the budget. So again, as long as we can return to those levels of staffing, then we're fairly confident in that. But again, we are looking, leading back to Councillor Freeman's point earlier, we are looking at the performance of officers and seeing if more can be achieved from them, trying to be more of a modern 21st century enforcement authority rather than the traditional going out and sending CEOs and with luck finding stuff. So that's where the data side of the operation is starting to come in now. But I shan't rant too much about that. But yeah, so we're confident as long as the recruitment is resolved. But we are looking at what if the recruitment isn't resolved, and what measures can be done to mitigate that gap afterwards in year.
And final quick comment, and we are not allowed to increase the value of the PCNs. No, that's a national thing, isn't it?
That's correct. The Secretary of State sets the bands within which the councils can operate, and we're at the higher of the two bands that are allowed at the moment. Scotland, with its devolved government, has just increased its PCNs, or the allowed bands. Scotland only has 1 point at which it sets its PCN level. So we have two, we have higher and lower. And you might remember that in 2015, the average was £60, and one of them went down at the same time as the other one was put up. But they haven't changed since 2015. There's a bit of lobbying going on nationally at the moment to find out whether that might be increased at all or not. I don't see that's going to happen in the near future at all.
Thank you. Councillor Porter.
Yeah, I've got a few things I'd like to ask, but the first one was, you mentioned when you were talking about the deficit, you said that part of the deficit was due to starting up a few new areas of the business. What was that? What new areas of the business have started up that have contributed to this?
So in the recent past, we've implemented the digital team. So there's 2 cameras in Dovercourt that we put in, and 2 cameras in Winstry Road that we put in. And those we put in as a pilot project to find out the benefits that they have in the area. And I have to say, they were immensely successful, more ever than we'd ever hoped in changing motorist behaviour, such that the level of PCNs they issued on those school clearways outside schools, motorist behaviour was changed in about 8 weeks. We didn't ever dream that that would be the case. We thought, we'd have to go some time before we'd move these cameras onto the next site. So in the meantime, we've identified a further 40 sites that these cameras can be redeployed to. But it wasn't our intention to move the cameras at all during the pilot stage, but it does carry the cost of that pilot project. We've recently arranged to move those cameras on and on and on again. That's £5, as I understand, to the Mayor's charity, if that happens.
Yes, apologies.
So we've agreed to move those cameras on and on and on again now with a rolling programme. And they may indeed be supplemented by some more at some point in the future. We wait to see whether that's the case or not. But there is an issue outside schools. We can't get to every school at the time we need to. We have a limited set of resources and quite a lot of schools to get to. So this is another way of getting to more of those places. It does come with a cost, though. Now, at every point during NEPP's history, we've set up to make a change to the way we operate, get a bit more efficient, and take on some new work. And we've done that 3 or 4 times now. And this most recent piece is the most recent piece of new work we've taken on, those fixed camera sites. And it will take 1 or 2 years for us to understand the way the thing works, in the way we understand the rest of the business, and moving them on, and the cost of doing that versus the relative merit of having them. So, we're early days with this, with the camera scheme at the moment. And when we get the full data behind how often we have to move them and the sites that we're going to move them to and prepare them all and have them all ready so that we can do that quickly and simply between sites, we'll be in a position where that's absolutely slick and efficient as it possibly can be. We're learning a bit around what we need to do with that, and that's where some of the cost comes from at the moment.
Is that on? Yeah. Can you give me a number then on what that has contributed to the deficit for this year?
Not at the moment. I can't exactly know. Until I've seen a full year of the operation in the round and seen what the creditor and the debt. We had a conversation before about period 13, the creditor and the debtor. I need to see what that is in the current financial year before I can have a final estimate. But I do know the operating costs of the entire unit. What I haven't done is to separate out just the school cameras and just the camera cars that we'd had before. I do need to go and do a bit more work before I can give you an accurate figure on that. But I'm happy to have an offline conversation about the details there.
Okay, so this item is about raising money, essentially. But the last time we met, next year's budget was balanced. That didn't include any of these raises, did it? So what will these have? So, I mean, essentially, I questioned the budget for next year because I said that it didn't add up. And by my figures, it was probably going to be about £1 million in deficit. And last time we met, I think that this year's budget was that we were just going to cover it with the what do you call it? The resource pot, whatever. I've forgotten the name of it anyway. And with the money that we've got spare, essentially. But that means that next year's budget is going to be completely different. So if you're trying to raise money to cover a deficit that didn't exist just a couple of months ago, although it looked on paper like it was going to exist, but obviously that still wasn't predicted. How can we vote on raising up these prices in order to cover a deficit that doesn't exist according to your own budget for next year? And the problem with that is that we've got no accurate data for anything. We haven't really got any accounts. And bearing in mind each of the local authorities that sit here today, as we know, as you just said, are liable for the deficit, and which will be, well, 50,000 this year, but the deficit isn't 350,000. The deficit is 680,000 as we sit here today. It's only the only reason that it's only 50,000 for each authority as we sit here at this exact moment is because you're going to use up all of your reserves. That's the word. So how on earth can we vote on trying to increase something when your own figures don't tell us anything and you haven't provided any accounts? I've asked for accounts. We've had nothing. We've got no information on anything. And then, of course, we have the off-street parking, which we've questioned before, because you run off-street parking, but it's the same people running off-street parking as running on-street parking. Now, technically, you shouldn't be doing it. If Colchester Borough Council want to run people's off-street parking under a service agreement, they can, but it should be a separate operation to the NEPP. It shouldn't be the same people. Now, I know you do sort of a 70-30 split, but again, we've asked for accounts on it. We don't get the accounts on it. But you can't expect for us to come into this meeting and vote on raising up prices against something which you said wasn't going to happen even a couple of months ago in the last meeting, when you give us no accounts for it. You don't give us any information at all. So it's, how can we vote on it? Because where does it come from? You know, this has just suddenly sprung up in the last couple of months simply because a pretty obvious massive deficit was coming. You know, where is the management of the NEPP itself? It should be the NEPP that's reducing its size down to accommodate the fact that it's not earning the correct amount of money that it should be. You know, next year's figures amounted to 2.25 million, I think, for PCM revenue, whereas this year we're running at, what, 100,000 a month? That's like 1.2 million. There's no way in the world you're going to get another £1 million worth of PCM revenue next year. It's impossible. It's completely impossible, but that's what your budget predicts next year. And like I say, it didn't even have these in, so I don't see why we can vote on this or how we can vote on this when we don't have any accurate figures at all. And I'd certainly recommend not voting for it, to be honest, because until we actually get something that's tangible, where we can all look at it and our own local authorities can go through it in detail and make sure that all of these numbers add up. So we're not just voting for this and then in another month come back and say, oh, well, actually, yeah, there is another 300,000 this year, and yeah, you're probably right, next year it's 1 million. You know, where does it end at the end of the day? And when you talk about these, obviously raising up permits, you know, in tendering, they're actually higher than most of the permits that are elsewhere in Essex, yet they're in the roads that are in the most deprived areas, the roads with terraced houses where people can't afford to pay large sums of money for permits. And of course, you know, it is worth noting that, of course, people can vote to get rid of the parking permits. And if they keep going up, certainly in a place like tendering, that's exactly what they're going to do. So if you try and raise up the cost of them, what you're going to end up doing in places like tendering is losing that income because people aren't going to put up with it. You know, it's already too expensive. You go down a lot of the roads that have got parking permits on them, there's hardly any cars parked there because people don't want to pay for the permits. They park elsewhere, you know, or they park there at night probably because you don't go down there at night. So, you know, there's all sorts of things there, but I just don't see, it's impossible to vote on something that raises up prices with no accounts, no information, nothing, when your own figures just at the last meeting said that you didn't need to put these raises in, and now it's become part of a, you know, an ongoing, we need to put this money in. You're sort of telling us, you know, there's a table here with the different options as if we don't vote for this, telling us exactly what will happen. One of them being that you would have to reduce the size of the NEPP, and then that would cost us lots of money in redundancies. But, of course, on the other hand, you also say that you can't find the staff. So, you know, if you don't recruit the staff, well, you haven't got to pay them redundancy in the first place. And I expect you have a fairly high turnover of staff because it always happens in those sort of jobs because people don't want to go out on the streets and be abused by people, essentially. So, yeah, you know, without more information, it's impossible for me to vote on this, which is something that's obviously been going on in the discussion in the background beyond this meeting anyway, because of the fact that my local authority is now going to be liable for a big chunk of cash, which could accumulate over the next few years. So although you're saying that, well, it, you know, doesn't matter because according to the agreement, probably, you know, we might be able to fill that gap and by 2025, hopefully you won't have to pay a penny for it. Actually, what could happen is that could keep accumulating so that each of the authorities has got an absolutely enormous bill to pay. And, you know, this doesn't answer it. This is simply putting a sticking plaster over something that even 1 month ago, just 1 month, what, was it a month ago, whenever the last meeting was, 1 or 2 months ago, you said wasn't going to happen. I literally said it in the meeting that those figures didn't add up. And here we sit with being asked to vote on something which increases prices because you're saying, well, basically that your figures didn't add up. And clearly at the beginning of this year, the budget for this year didn't add up either because now we're looking at, well, £680,000 deficit. But, as I've said, anybody that does the maths on it can see it's probably going to be close to £1 million. And that is enormous, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've got any answers for anything I've said there. I mean, some of it was just statements, but, you know, without the information, and this doesn't really hold any tangible information to tell us what the purpose of this was, where it came from, anything else, where your accounts are, And I say I did send an email back in January asking for accounts, but I've never had them. So, yeah, impossible for me to vote on it, essentially.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, if I could have had a crystal ball, I might be able to tell what the rate of pay increases were in the future. When we set the budget for the current financial year, we have to look back 18 months or so. And at that time, there was absolutely no indication that there'd be any pay increases at all. So we set the budget knowing what we knew at that time, coming out of the pandemic at that point. And there was no indication that there would be any sort of action to have any massively increased pay. There was no indication that inflation was about to take a vertical turn at all. So if I could foresee, I'd have set the budget, and then you say, well, you've allowed far too much money in there. It's a really fine line when you're estimating things so far in advance to try and get things right, and particularly in a chaotic, and I use that term in a statistical sense, chaotic in economic environment, to know exactly where we're going. I could budget massively for next year, and as the Chancellor says, he'll have inflation well under control again. So I don't have those forecasts to hand in the same way that I had for the preceding 10, pretty much, and everything that we knew about at that point. So there is some element of not quite knowing what's going on around the economy of inflation at the moment. And we do have the periodic figures that I give out via client officers. Client officers discussed the report at the pre-meeting and agreed that this would be the way forward that we were to take. The appendix describes the run-in to how we find ourselves here, and also the reasons that these price increases weren't taken during the pandemic, and at what point a report would be brought back. And I mentioned that in the appendix as well, that we bring a full review of permit prices, and that was minuted from one of the meetings during the pandemic, say, bring these prices back when the pandemic's a bit out of the way and we can see ourselves clear of that. Why is it important to act now? We still can't foresee those percentage increase rises, but we are in the position we're in. Next year we've budgeted, and if we didn't make any changes in the business, then I kind of agree with you. If we were static and just ploughed on regardless, yes, we'd probably end up with a massive deficit. And the system allows us to go and ask for that to be paid for. But no, we've not done that. We've taken some steps as a business to turn things around within the operation. Besides all these other things, what we need to do is to eradicate the deficit that has been accumulated and set ourselves off on a good footing for the future again. It's a one-off change of direction. We've been here before. We were here back in 2011, 12, and 12, 13, in exactly the same situation. We put the business back on a new footing and set off again. We eliminated the deficit at that position, at that stage, and we set off down a new course. And that's what I propose we do again, which is why the recommendation is that it is.
Thank you, Richard. It's important that we thrash out these conversations because, like you say, there are good times and then we fall sometimes upon more difficult times, and that's when we need to try to pull together. And I do sympathise with some of your comments, Councillor Porter, in relation to wanting to see and understand the finances a little bit better, because I'm fairly new to this as well, and big pages of figures do somewhat challenge my mind as well, especially with the complexities of it being under the parking hat. So I understand that. I will You want to ask a couple more questions, Councillor Porter? I'll take those questions, and then I'm going to ask our Essex County Council representative to have a little comment on this matter. Who's Jo? She's joining us online. But Councillor Porter, if you want to go first, that would be fine.
Yeah, I was just going to come back to it and say, because it didn't really answer the question, that we voted on a draft budget, and that didn't include this. So how has it gone from that position, just at the last meeting, to this, where there's this big deficit? You talk about not being able to predict it, but the reality is that that's part of the job. You've got to be able to look at it. We've got a reserve, but you're going to have to swallow that entire reserve, and then on top of that, another 350,000, possibly another 300,000 on top of that. Next year's figures. So you mentioned about a lot of that was about staffing costs, okay? But the simple fact is that there's a massive deficit in the PCN predicted revenue as well. There's no way that's going to be anywhere near what it says, and it's not going to be next year either. And if you continue on the path of saying that PCN is going to be, or revenues raised, is going to be £2 million plus, then you're going to be in deficit every single year, because it's impossible. It's never going to happen unless the PCN fine cost goes up, or suddenly people start parking everywhere and you can start, but it's not going to happen. Town centres are literally going to get less and less PCN revenue from them, because everything's moving out of town. All of the businesses look at Colchester. I don't even bother going into Colchester anymore, because I can just go up to Stanway and park for free and go to M&S and everything there. So, that's the reality of it. Whereas once upon a time I might have parked in some sort of restricted parking area and, left the car too long in it and ended up with a ticket. And that's really where you used to pick up the revenue from places like that. And it's gone. It's gone because people just aren't bothering. So it's never going to come back. So, I go back to the question I asked, which is how can we vote on this with no figures? And how can the position go from what it was a couple of months ago to what it is now? We voted on that draft budget. The draft budget was clearly completely inaccurate, because we know that now from the figures that we've been given for period 10 and 11 this year, which make it quite clear that nothing's going to change in April, May, June, July. It's just going to be exactly the same. It's not like it's some complete fresh start. So the draft budget was wrong. That's going to be completely wrong. But this year's is completely wrong, and we still don't have any of the figures. And like I say, I've asked for accounts. We've not been given them. So we can't even go through it. But we're liable for the debt. So you mentioned about, we'll have to ask for the deficit. But, going around and saying, well, you owe us £50,000. That's the taxpayer that owes you £50,000. It's literally coming out of everybody's pocket, because the NEPP has overspent. And it didn't even know it was going to overspend a year ago. So, there needs to be an answer as to why we're in this position at this exact moment, and why we've been given no proper figures as to why we should vote for this, because this doesn't make any sense from even a month ago. And I know what you're saying, that you couldn't predict it 18 months ago, but this isn't 18 months. I'm talking about the last meeting. Even in emails in January, we had an email exchange where you said I was wrong and gave me some more figures. And the simple fact is, it wasn't incorrect. There is a massive deficit. So, why would we be voting for this increase now, which I don't think is going to plug any gaps at all, or get rid of the deficit at all? Because next year is going to be much worse than this year. And like I say, it's going to be again. So, that's the question, essentially. Because at the minute, there's absolutely no way in the world I'm going to vote for increases with no information at all that gives us, anything that would make what you're saying, votable on, as it were.
I guess there is a question of what your perceived lack of information is to others in the room, Councillor Porter, because I've been presented and have looked at some information, and your interpretation of that is clearly different to potentially others in the room. That's a possibility. But there is information here. There is a lot of information that's presented to all of the partners before the meeting and the members, and a lot of that takes some digesting, especially when we've got all these caveats that Richard and the team have tried to explain, which are difficult to explain in some circumstances. So, as I explained, I'm going to just let Jo come in. She's from Essex County Council. She oversees the contract.
Can I just make one more point?
You can make one more point.
So you just mentioned the information, but we've asked for accounts. we haven't had any. We've literally had the most basic, the stuff that's in this document, basically. And as the people liable to be paying 5-figure, 6-figure sums, what's in this is not acceptable.
Yeah, and I think that the learning point and takeaway point there is clearly, and I was at those meetings where you've asked for various things, and I've been copied in on emails where you've asked for things. I think we must learn from that and start to present things in a way that all of us can interpret them in a way that is understandable, that we then feel we have a right to vote on something such as important as increasing prices. So I understand that point. But we are in the position that we are in as of this day, as of this moment. Joe, welcome from your online position.
Yes, thank you. Hi everybody. Yes, sorry I can't be there with you today. I just wanted to perhaps add my 2 pence into the conversation, because we've been doing a lot of work with Richard and his team, and I'm sure he'd probably say it's been quite a painful process in some respects, because I can see you nodding your head there, Richard, thank you, because we have been sort of challenging every aspect of his budget. And just checking that actually this is probably the best balanced position we're in terms of trying to resolve that deficit and move forward. We realise it's not a popular option by any means. I don't think it's popular with anybody, but Richard and the team have worked exceptionally hard to get to this point. And just probably to reiterate, the kind of cost increases that have come in on the staff base are completely outside of Richard's control or knowledge or influence. To any degree, so I don't see how really you could have foreseen that level of staff increase. We know that fee increases are never acceptable, never popular, particularly at the minute. But actually, we have to be able to recover the cost of the function. So I think the amount of work that's gone in, we're confident, along with Richard, that actually this is a good option to take forward as a recovery plan. And I think, Richard, it would be fair to say we'll continue to monitor this on a monthly basis going forward into the new year. We have talked about some other things to bear in mind for the new year as well, as has been hinted at in the conversations. So it's not something that I think we're anticipating this will be the one-size-fits-all. This is a big factor in getting us back on the road to a better position. And those fees and charges haven't been looked at for a little while, so it was one of the things that we felt was probably more reasonable to do.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, Rory.
Thank you, Chair. So I understand many of your concerns, Councillor Porter, just echoing some of the points that Joe made. I know that there's a commitment to work with yourselves at Tendering District Council. Colleagues of ours I know have met and had discussions around the finances. I think it's a challenge, as Richard has already said, in terms of the level of operational detail we go into with the budgets. Ordinarily, the level of information we provide is sufficient in order to make decisions at kind of cabinet and portfolio holder level, or certainly that's consistent with the approach we take at Colchester City Council. And as I say, it may be the position with other local authorities too. That said, I know we'd be committed to work with you and provide more information if you feel that you haven't had that. And I know that our director colleagues are in contact, so we'll be doing that going forward. So if there's anything you feel that is still missing and it gets you into a position where you feel more comfortable, then we'll happily facilitate that. What I would add, and I know Councillor Goss has sent his apologies because of work, but he is supportive of the proposals set out in the report and would be concerned in terms of the budget position overall if we weren't to make that decision.
Councillor Porter.
I'm slightly concerned at the fact, actually, that Essex have been working on this with the NEPP, because they're one of the partners. I realise this is an Essex County Council committee as such because it was voted to exist by the Cabinet. But the reality is that Essex, they get the surplus from this agreement. So if there's any profits, they get the profits. And the authorities here that are sat here are liable for the deficit, the losses. So why are we not involved in the same meetings that have been going on discussing this? Because we should be, because we're the ones that literally have got to pay for the deficit. So I'm really concerned that we've not been involved at all, because we should be. Essex is only a partner like anybody else on this committee. So why are the meetings going on that we're not involved in?
Joe, did you want to answer that?
I can do. I mean, we've delegated the function for the parking partnerships to the parking partnerships, if you like. And yes, Richard is the parking partnership manager, but that is a delegated function, obviously from the county council. So that's why we've been involved in that. So it's not from a point of view of us trying to get a surplus. What we're trying to do is make sure that the partnership is sustainable going forward. We've not been. I think Richard would be aligned in this view that we've not been focusing on trying to get to a point where we can actually take a surplus. What we've been focusing on is making sure that there's a long-term sustainability here for the parking partnership.
Ian.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. Yes, I agree with this. Just a few things I would appreciate being able to clarify before, so we can move the debate on a bit further. But there does seem to be a tendency to agree with or to look at the things that we like, where there's a reason to be optimistic. But there's also a tendency to overlook with the things that we disagree with or that we find a bit unpalatable. And people aren't focusing on the facts here. The fact is that this deficit, as reported so far this year, is in the region of £700,000. It's not 350,000. It is, as Councillor Porter said, £700,000. And that is very optimistic again, because if you look at the budget, the actual figures received are £1.2 million in PCNs this year, an average of about 110,000 a month. But the forecast for the outturn, even to give us this current deficit of 700,000, is relying on income of £600,000, and almost a six-fold increase in PCNs in the last few weeks of the year, in order to make it even look reasonably respectable. I think we need a bit of dose of honesty with this, so that we can address the deficit, we can address the way the NEPP's run, so that we can get it on a proper even footing. If we keep operating on these wildly optimistic scenarios, we're never going to get anywhere. Because I'm looking at the fee increases as proposed, and even the harshest ones, Councillor Porter is right, they do affect the least well off in tendering. They may not in other districts, but they certainly do in tendering. Even if we go down that route, even with the highest level of income yield from the fees and charges, that's still only about £500,000 a year. So that's still £200,000 short of this year's very optimistic outturn. So we do need to address this in another way. And there's just talk about PCN increases coming, but how? How are we going to make the recruitment? Where are the figures to show us what numbers you need in order to balance the books, what numbers you need to retain, and if there's another 8% increase for all those staff, is that going to have a negative effect as well? I think the fact is there's not enough detail here, and it does cause concerns. It just isn't enough for us to work on. We're working on optimism rather than fact, and we do need more detail.
Thank you, Ian. That might be one of the most reasoned comments that you will make before you retire off to sunnier climes and not be attending these meetings anymore. I mean, what your key thing you've said, which is obviously where we are now to try and move this discussion on, very valid point. I think what I'm hearing as chairman is, and I've heard it a few times over previous meetings, is there is some element of confusion and that over-optimism that you've just described, and I would ask my Essex colleague to take that on board along with the NEPP, in as much as how we move forward from this, not only from this position, but moving forward into the future, as to how we ensure that all of our partners feel and understand what is being presented to them, what the finances exactly are, that there isn't a huge over-optimism. But coming back from that, I just want to say that, we do often go through bad times as well as good, and we will always have to answer the difficult questions in times like this, and that's exactly what we're looking to do now. It's important that we have these discussions and that they're taken on board by everyone in this room. We are in a position that we do need to try to move forward, as I've explained, and I think we do need to consider the decisions that are being put before us today. we've taken on board your points, Councillor Porter, but unless there's any other comments or thoughts or feelings in a similar vein, then we will take these price increases to a vote. I just wanted to give you all one more opportunity just to have your say before we do that. Richard, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The only thing is a sort of technical question. Both the both the spreadsheets don't add up totals, or I can't find them. Ian mentioned 500,000, but I think that's quite important in terms of the yield. Sorry, I mean, there's two issues. One of them is how it affects, or how they affect our individual districts, but also the total in terms of NEPP. So I wonder if you can read those off. I'm sorry.
Maybe not. Yeah, so I think the table you're probably after is on page 24 of the agenda, which kind of is a summary of what the yield would be based on. That's all right. That's okay. Yeah, it's separate from the rest of the tables. Yeah.
Any other further points before we, as I explained, take this forward to some form of a vote? No? Right, so the options outlined in front of you within the agenda, there are 4 to decide on, and with your acceptance, might be the right word, I might ask that we take a vote on all 4 at once. If you wish to split them, then I'm happy to do so, but I'll take that as a consensus within the room. Richard, what was your comment, please?
The 1.3, decide to introduce a transaction fee. We don't currently have. Sorry, no, that is the permits. I'm sorry. Okay.
Consent?
No.
So 1.1, which is to decide on the fees and charges, which Richard has given his own recommendation for, as laid out in the paper that has been presented to us. Number 2 is to decide and introduce an administration charge for making change to vehicle registrations, which was outlined and explained. To decide to introduce a transaction fee to the permit, pay and park and visitor permit services. And number 4 was to decide to introduce any changes after the relevant statutory notices have been given for implementation between weeks commencing 29th of May and 12th of June. So I've said that we will take a vote on all 4 unless people want to split them. I've not heard that. Councillor Kane?
Just a comment on 1.1. It's not clear from the recommendation that this is the CPI pricing that we're looking at.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kane. I believe Councillor Walker, Councillor Freeman. Mr. Walker left. You suggested, I quote, that we close this hole once and for all, or something along those lines. If we're going to make a change, then let's make a positive change. So that was more of a statement, was it? I'm interested to know.
No, I don't think it's a statement. I think we should fix it properly this time. So I'd go for the high option, high cost option. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to split this then on this. Well, I'm certainly going to do number 1 first as an individual item. So we will vote on the option to increase as per the CPI? RPI. Ian?
Apologies, Tim, just before we vote, could we have some clarity on table 1, what the actual net yield figure is actually? Because I don't understand that cumulative thing at the bottom. It says that if we go for option 1 this year, there would raise £276,000 additional and £371,000 in a full year. And with option 2, which is the full year, you get £371,000. Is that right? And then where do we get to 1,066,000? I don't see where that figure comes from and where it's accumulating from. Is it an annual increase of that much in that year, or is it over several years? I can't work it out.
Year on year.
Thank you. Yes. if we were to increase in the next financial year, because it would take some time to advertise and implement, we won't get those in likely before June. So we'll only have a part year in the next financial year of option 1. But then in subsequent years, we'll collect a full year of that increase, even if we did nothing else. And then there's the option 3, which is to harmonise the prices further, which are on the ongoing charts, and each one of those also has a yield, and those are a year-on-year increase then to harmonise the prices following. So your cumulative row at the bottom is all of those things added together. So it'd be the 90k from the pay and display increases and the small permit increase earlier in the year, 276k part year, then 356k, 371, no, none of those. There's a number in the text for the full year of option 1, which is 356k ongoing, and then thereafter the little increases would add on cumulatively to give you the bottom line figure. So part year and the next year, full year, and full year of the first increase, and then if we harmonise as well, it'll be a small increase in each of the subsequent years for 23, 24, 23, 24, 25, and so on.
Ian?
Yeah, so this is not just permits then, these are the curbside charging and other income sources as well.
Curbside charging is delegated to match the nearest car park anyway, so those changes would go through. If car parks go up, the nearest on-street would go up anyway. These are permit prices, and the prices are set out in the table. So there's a range of prices set out in the table there.
Yeah, Richard, that wasn't a question. The question is we're looking at a current year deficit of £700,000, even with a very optimistic forecast. And the permit increases that we looked at seem to only generate 500,000 with the best, or 600,000 with the best figures. But with these are more because you seem to appear to have added the other incomes into them to make them all add up, which does confuse the picture a bit because we can't go back and check those against the budget at the same time.
These are the new yields on this table 1 here. These are the additional prices there.
Is it permits only, or is it all income?
It's the things in the table that have an increase against them. So it's the first and second permits, third permits where there are any, and there's some things in the other the table below, Vista permits and dispensations, and that's it. The yields are set out in the column with the blue boxes running down them for each of the different options there. That's permits and the ancillary Vista permits and trader permits and discretionary other permits.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to take a vote on increasing the prices as per the RPI. Can I have a show of hands in favour of that, please? 1. Okay, so we fall back to the recommended option, which is on the CPI. Can I have a vote for that, please, in favour of increasing prices as per the CPI? 2. Against? 1. Abstain? 1. That's carried then. We move on then to the next item of business in 1.2, which is decide and introduce administration charge. Can I see a show of hands in favour to introduce that price increase on 1.2, please? Show of hands. 4, 1. Against, please. 1. Abstain. 2. I might do. I'll come back to that in a minute. We'll do the vote first. 1.3, to decide and introduce a transaction fee of 10p per transaction. Those 4, please. 4. None. Against. 2. Abstain. 2, thank you. Number 1.4, to decide and introduce any charges after the relevant statutory notice has been given between weeks commencing 29th of May and 12th of June. Those for that change, please. 4. Against? 1. Abstain? 2. 3. 3. So that takes us back up to 1.2, does it? To decide and introduce an initial charge for making change to a vehicle registration mark of any permit. I'll vote in favour of that. So I think we had 2 carried and 2 failed. Is that correct, Owen?
Yes, apologies, Mr. Chairman. Yes, that's correct. So,
The prop choice 1.4 to do.
So, if the vote is to go through with the fees and charges, they have to come in at some point. So this is about choosing when that happens.
Right.
So it's either now or later.
My
yeah,
apologies.
that's
So
yeah. Sorry.
1.4, yeah.
So we might just re-vote on that then. So it's a matter of timing rather than increase. I think you were looking a bit strange when I said it, Sam. You should shout figure it out. Yeah. So May or June? Is that what you're saying? Now or May or June? Right. Who would vote in favour of increasing now? Show of hands. 4, please. No, 1. Against? 2. And abstain? 1. And then a vote for May and June? 4. 1. Against? Councillor Porter. 2. And abstain? Councillor Van Dolkin. This is the most extreme meeting I've been to. Where does that leave us, Owen?
Doesn't work. Yeah.
Apart from confused.
I don't think you can vote not to do something you voted to do.
Well, yeah, but who did that?
So we voted against both. We voted for the CPI 2 to 1.
Right.
Without your vote. And all 1.4 is saying is to do it in June or not.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. I see. So we only needed a yes or a no.
Yeah.
Is that right? So we've voted to do it. It's just when we're going to do it.
We voted against it.
Exactly. Right. So it's we did it right, didn't we? Now was voted on, and May and June was voted on.
Yes.
And which one?
yes.
Both fell. Oh right. Oh, that's mate.
You can't vote to do
That,
something then.
so that means I've got a vote, does it?
No, Mr. Chairman. Well, I make it for both of the votes on the timing specifically. We had 1 in favour, 2 against, and 1 abstention, which means they would fall. And as a chairman, you'd cast a casting vote if they were tied. So they do both fall on the timing.
Right. So it's my poor wording that's got us into this predicament, is it? Right. So someone tell me what? Can you tell me what the motion is then, please, for that one?
I'm afraid I can't, but I've only got the motions, the decisions that were put in the paper in front of me.
Go on, Richard.
So, having voted in option 1.1 to increase the charges, it's then the timing of when you want that to happen. If you vote for it to happen, it'll happen after the decision has been through the calling process. If you want it to happen in June with a delay, then we need to vote for it to happen in June.
We've done that. Yeah. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Democracy.
Yes, yeah. It'll be a few weeks before we get to it anyway.
Yeah, okay. Right. Right, we'll get to move on. Right, this next item. Right, we are now moving on the agenda. We are on item number 8. The policy to beat all policies, the no stopping cones policy.
Tell you, this is where it's at.
Jason, please.
Thank you. Yeah, onto the main event. So this policy is one that we've had since the beginning of NEPP. It's to summarise how we currently issue no stopping cones, so essentially the yellow cones that you'll see out on the street. Our technical team handle those at the moment. We don't currently charge a fee for the provision of those. So there is currently a cost that's absorbed by the service in the provision of those cones. What this report and ultimately the policy looks to do is to levy cost against the provision of that service. So if customers do want to borrow cones and us deliver them and pick those up, and also if any cones go missing as a result of that loan, then we've got a policy that enables us to charge for that service and also to recover that fee. So hopefully the policy itself is relatively self-explanatory, but I'm happy to take any questions that anybody may have.
Cones, any questions? No. Sorry, Councillor Porter, yes. You're voting against cones?
Does this actually cover all of your costs, our costs, in the pricing? Because I don't look like it's enough to me. You might be surprised that I'm thinking that, but it looks like it should be more, because I can't imagine that these cover your costs. And frankly, for stuff like this, there shouldn't be, anybody wanting cones should be paying for the cones and all of the costs involved. It shouldn't be the taxpayer paying for it.
Well, I know for a fact Tendring have got some cones at the back of the town hall, so we need to look into that, Councillor Porter.
We can try
because you've been very financially prudent and all that.
Yeah, it's a good point to make, Councillor Porter. The way our technical service works is the guys are out and about quite regularly anyway, so a lot of the providing of the cones wouldn't be necessarily going from base to deliver to one place and back again. So we would work the service in a way that makes it most efficient and cost effective to provide those. There may be instances where we do need to drive to the far depths of Uttlesford or Epping to provide cones, but we have those from different bases. We have them located in different bases. So this is, without knowing exactly where the cones you're providing need to go to, it's very difficult to estimate the cost of doing that. So this is our best guess, I guess, at providing that service. If members did want to, for us to come back and recommend increases to these prices, we can do that. But as I say, they would be very estimate pricing. So this is where we see the cost falling. Yeah. And as I say, at the moment we're not charging for the service anyway. So it is we'll be in surplus immediately almost.
Any comments?
Yeah, so for members' benefit, is £10 a cone is what we lose currently if those cones aren't returned to us, and hence why we're looking to apply a slight extra fee on top of that if we do lose them. So,
any other comments? Right, can we have a proposer for this temporary no stopping cones policy? Thank you, Councillor Van Dolken. Can we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Kane. All those in favour, please? That's unanimous. God, we got that sorted. Number 9 is to do with an earlier agenda item, which I think is ever more prudent now in relation to the conversations we're having about money, finances, and that is the TRO scoring methodology for TROs.
Yep, so this is falling off the back of the December committee meeting where we agreed the new TRO policy. This essentially is a new methodology for scoring the applications that we receive. In terms of highlighting the differences between this and the existing one, which does look similar, what we've done is include a kind of a pre-scoring criteria at the top of this scoring sheet, which requires all applications to have a certain level of support before we will consider that and make a decision on it at the joint committee. So if we were to receive applications in future which do not come with the relevant support that we would deem necessary, then essentially wouldn't be brought back for the committee to make a decision on it. So hopefully this should tighten up the process in terms of the applications that we receive and also the decisions that members make at the October committee meeting.
Thank you, Jason. Is there any comments, please? Richard, please.
Thank you, Chairman. You'll be pleased to hear that I'm not suggesting changing any of the scoring, but I would like to put a plea in that parish councils be mentioned in perhaps where it says at the top pre-scoring criteria that an additional line, scheme or restriction is supported by the parish council where there is one, where available. That's one suggestion. In an ideal world, I'd actually like to see it given points. But I know we want to get this done. We've been talking about it for a couple of years, so that's my comment.
I've only been here 6 months.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We can do that and include and circulate a copy of that final scoring methodology. Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the score, in the previous version that was shared as part at the joint committee, that it was given a score. Our concern with handling that way is that essentially the other things could end up outweighing that particular point. And I think if we're serious about delivering, TROs that are worthy and necessary, then we need to make the evidence the kind of a key part of the criteria. And if it's not there, then why should we bother with the rest of it, really? So hopefully that's fairly clear. But if anyone's got any suggestions for further amendments, I'm happy to include them.
Is there any other comments? I would highly endorse the parish comment. Yeah, Councillor Kane.
I'm just wondering, is there a requirement to reassess applications that have already gone in so that they're on the same scoring system when we actually come to compare them?
Yeah, really good point. So in producing this, we did some of that backtracking to see what the outcome of that would be. You'd probably be unsurprised to hear that it does actually increase the scores a little bit, but what it also does, it bridges the gap between some of the scores that we've been getting. A lot of the schemes that we've been introducing out of 100, they're getting sort of 25 to 30 points, which, on the face of it would make you think, why are we introducing any of these if they're scoring that low? So what this should do is make the gap bigger between the scores that applications are getting and make it easier to make a judgment on score alone, but not necessarily just the score. Yeah.
Any other comments? Can I have a proposer then that we move forward with this suggestion, please? Richard, thank you. Seconder? Richard. All in favour, please? Thank you very much. Obstructive parking.
This is the part of the meeting where you've all been looking forward, I can tell, with bated breath to find out if there's any more news. Well, I can tell you it's a very short update because there is no more news.
Any comments? It's no news, Richard. Go on, Richard.
There's, it won't go away. The fact there may not be any news, I have a select number of individuals who Ben may hear about this regularly, and telling them that there's no more news will not encourage them to give me a gentle time of it. So obstructive parking is an issue, certainly in Great Dunmow, no question about that.
Thank you, Richard and Richard. We move on then to number 11, which is the forward plan. Is that you, Owen?
That's me, Mr. Chairman. I think members will be glad to hear this. I've got nothing to add to it, just to point out that we have worked with the SEP over a couple of meeting clashes between our meetings and the SEP's meetings in the coming financial year. So at 5.1, we have two meetings where we're proposing changes to our meeting dates so that we don't clash, and therefore Essex County Council colleagues such as Joe are able to attend and don't have to choose which one to come to. So I don't have anything else to add to the report, but I'll happily take questions.
Right, brilliant. A little item of extra business would be just to give Ian Taylor, representative officer from tendering, a little something. Bought you some sandwiches. and a card, which I think Richard's going to walk over and present to you.
Indeed.
Seeing as you're not so good on your feet anymore.
Yes.
No, thank you. Ian has been a representative, I believe, of this committee for a lot longer than any of us all put together, added up times by 10. You've been on it forever, haven't you, Ian? Is that correct?
I have. It feels like forever.
Yeah. And your wealth of knowledge and experience in relation to parking matters will live on forever. As you said to me on the way here, you will become a moaning Minnie, writing letters weekly to the newspaper. Thank you, Ian. Thanks for all you've done for the committee. Thanks for all the support you've given everyone, I'm sure, over that time. And we wish you a very successful retirement. So thank you very much indeed for all that you've done. I wish all of the councillors in the room the very best of luck moving into what is an important time for many of us, I'm sure, where we seek re-election to hopefully come back and carry on our good work at the NEPP. So I hope to see as many of you again at our next meeting when we convene. And other than that, it just leaves me to say thank you to Braintree Council once again. Joe, thank you for dropping in, and all those that came to speak today at the back, and for our wonderful catering at Braintree and hospitality. So I wish you all a very safe and happy day. Thank you.